So it's to no one's surprise that the Umbrella Academy had a stinker of a final season. Just look at those scores. Whether it be the lack of development of the characters, the lack of episodes in the final season, or the destruction of the characters that we came to understand in the first 3 seasons, it was a complete mess. Well, with a bit of time now passing since the finale aired, I thought I'd have a go at coming up with my own ending to the Umbrella Academy and sharing exactly how I feel the final season's main plot should have gone. Emphasis on main plot. So let's get into it. Here is how the Umbrella Academy should have ended. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers from pretty much every season of the show. Well, from the off, I'd immediately can the 6-year time jump that didn't make any sense and made us miss a lot of the backstory to what happened to the characters in this timeline, as that is pretty much the foundation of how we're going to build on from Season 3. The entire first episode would be building towards a few years later, not 6, that's too many. And almost like the first episode of Season 2, we'd see each character's perspective over each of those years, and we'd find out how they ended up in the positions and mindsets that they were in all that time later, something which would provide more depth to the characters from the off. For example, the absence of Sloane would get addressed straight away. I would have it so Sloane didn't make it through the reset because she only existed in one of the timelines and was never a part of the core family members of the Umbrella Academy. And that would be the only reason as to why Ben would have been able to have got through, because upon the reset, he was sent over as he existed in multiple timelines. Within Luther's journey, we'd see him mourning the love of his life, and him almost being at rock bottom, a place that he'd never been before. This would show us a completely different side to the character, and the absence of Sloane, the person that he loved most, and also his powers. He would have undergone some kind of identity crisis, which would have led him into the job that he was doing. I would have had him enter a dark part of his mind, and the siblings being back together would be the very thing that would have been able to have got him out of it, rather than making him this stupid buffoon. With regards to Diego and Lila, I'd have it so we would have actually seen the decline of their relationship, and truly understood why it was that Lila felt as though she wasn't as in love with him anymore, rather than just hearing it in a sentence and seeing the both of them drifting apart. With Alison, in terms of her and Ray, I'd have it so that Ray and Claire ended up dying in an accident. She loved Ray in the previous seasons, and I couldn't see them separating. So with them both dying and her losing the reason that she betrayed her siblings by making the deal with Reginald, that would be something that would be weighing on her mind and making her question if it was all worth it, as she wouldn't have spoken to her siblings in a long time and would have suffered alone. I believe Klaus would have still found her though and been the only one that was willing to forgive her because he relies on that support. But it would have been a two-way street and it would have been shared support as she would have been suffering too. However, he wouldn't have been a germaphobe like the show made him out to be. Viktor could have still moved away as that was a trait that happened to him in Season 2 when he forgot his memory. Ben could have also found himself in prison still, as to be fair, he was probably the least likable and most selfish sibling that was there. And 5 would have been working for the CIA still. This is what would have been the catalyst which would ultimately go on to cause the group to be reunited together, rather than a random birthday party that didn't make sense at all. 5 would have been investigating the Keepers, and they would have all pretty much been the same and had the same belief system, other than anticipating a cleanse. They would have just been this harmless conspiracy cult. With him finding out about the artifacts and that they were bleeding through the timelines, because of that meeting, it would have made him reach out to his siblings and realize that there was now an issue that needed to be solved. Another apocalypse. One major element of this timeline bleeding would be the fact that there was another Ben that was within the timeline. The fact that the individual that we saw during the post-credit scene existed would be something that was causing it, because that would mean that there was an imbalance there, but the group wouldn't know about it at this point. So that would have actually cleared up 2 of the major questions that were left unanswered at the end of the actual Season 4, Sloane and also the post-credit scene. With the group now being aware of the situation, they would have then approached Hargreaves Tower with the intention of looking for a way to get their powers back. This is something that they would have actually wanted and not been actively avoiding. They've lived their entire lives with powers, so the prospect of getting them back would be something that they'd be looking forward to. The way in which they'd get their powers back wouldn't be through Marigold being found as an artifact, but instead, because Alison didn't have her powers drained at the end of Season 3 by Reginald, upon the timeline being resetting, she would have still had her powers. So Reginald would look to utilize the Marigold that was inside of her system in order to feed it to the siblings and allow them to regain their powers that way, something which would revert their powers back to their original ones. Reginald would agree to do this because the prospect of losing his perfect world where he's pretty much in charge of it all is something that would frighten him. This is the very thing that he's always wanted, and from there, this would be where we'd also delve into the backstory of Sir Reginald Hargreaves, his origin, and I'd have it so that we'd find out that he had to flee his home planet due to it being taken over and destroyed by another alien species where there were barely any survivors. In fact, he would have fled on his own, believing that Abigail, his love, was killed there. He would have selected Earth because he would have realized that it was a planet that was far enough away from his home one, and not advanced enough, ultimately meaning that it'd be able to take control and play around with it, making him create a strong disguise and thrive there. However, as time would have gone on, the power would have started to have gone to his head, and we'd see that he slowly started to morph into the very type of individual that took over his home planet, hence why he always wanted it to be the way that it was at the end of Season 3. He wanted the power because it was ingrained within him due to his past experience. We'd have also seen that Abigail would have arrived on Earth and managed to survive and locate Reginald that way too, something that would have been miraculous. Then, upon her death, he would have released the marigold in her honor like we saw, and then the Umbrella Academy would have been born. In terms of Jennifer and her encountering Ben, I'd lose the way that happened and can the idea of Durango. I wouldn't have something that was so important being introduced to us so late on in the show. Jennifer wouldn't even be in this season. The sole reason this final apocalypse would be happening and the reason the timelines would be bleeding would be because Reginald created this perfect world, and it would be a consequence of that, showing that he can't simply keep playing with time and space. The error of the imbalance of there being two Bens would be what ultimately caused it, and it would be a mistake on his part. After everybody regained their powers, they would all be fine with them and be happy. However, 5 would have issues with the blinking. This is where we'd see him blink, and he'd arrive where the version of Ben that was in the post-credits scene was. With his intelligence that we saw throughout every season of the show, he'd put 2 and 2 together and understand that Ben was the very person that was causing the tear in the timeline. This would then connect back to the fact that the original Ben was dead, and that the Ben that they were with was a sparrow, and this new Ben on the train was from a completely different timeline. This would still make Ben the key like they wanted in the final season. This would then start the arc of the group realizing that the only way for the apocalypse to not occur would be for the 2 different versions of Ben to be killed. Something that the group would refuse to do. The trauma of losing Ben again would be too much, as they pretty much adopted the Sparrow Ben as their own. They'd also recognized that the timeline that they were originally from and the life that they knew was so different to the one that they were now in, and they realized that there were consequences to playing with time and space. This would then spark the villain arc of Sir Reginald Hargreaves, and we'd see that he'd be driven to take down the Umbrella Academy because he'd want to kill Ben. This would be in order to preserve the world that he's always wanted and for his home to not be destroyed again. This would cause him to reveal his true colours and for his alien form to come to the forefront as he'd look to destroy the very children that he raised and the other version of Ben. This is where we'd then see an epic battle taking place between the siblings, and we'd see the full strength of Hargreaves. A lone alien that was able to compete with all of them, and we'd see exactly why he was able to train them to fight the way that they could. Ultimately, Viktor would be the very person that would kill Hargreaves. Rather than there being reconciliation like we saw in Season 4, we'd see Viktor releasing that trauma that he endured when he was younger and unleashing hell on Hargreaves as revenge, ultimately disintegrating him. By this point in the story, the timeline would have had a massive tear within it, and the world would look something like what it did in Season 3. The group would have that same mindset that they had then, and they'd all come together one final time as they rejoiced over the fact that Ben was safe, but also accepted the fact that they knew that it was over for them, and they'd accept that. They knew their lives were so far different to what they once were, and that they almost didn't belong in the timeline that they were in. They'd almost have the same mindset that Abigail had in Season 4, basically saying that they shouldn't be there. The siblings would die being content with one another, and there'd be no hatred present at all, just love. That would be the whole reason as to why they wouldn't have just killed Ben and carried on living as normal, because the group were there together. Unity is at the core of the Umbrella Academy, and that was something that was missing in Season 4, but it would be paramount in this story. The world would then be destroyed along with them, and the show would end. No marigold flowers, no hint at them being able to make it back, no happy timeline where everybody survives. The actions of a selfish, greedy alien would have caused the planet to be destroyed, exactly like what happened to his home planet, showing that he became the very thing that he was once afraid of. A bleak ending because the world would have ended. However, it would be bittersweet because the Umbrella Academy would realize that they needed to die together, and nobody got left behind. The end. So, there you have it, how the Umbrella Academy should have ended. If you want to see a video breaking down the downfall of the final season, then click on the card in the top corner. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find your favourite TV shows and movies broken down. How do you think the show should have ended? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.